You've probably seen photos of these places and immediately assumed someone ran them through an AI image generator. Nope. Every single one of them is real, sitting right here in the United States, completely unbothered by your disbelief. Here are 18 unreal places in the US that look computer-generated. Place 18. Fly Geyser, Nevada. Most things that look this ridiculous were at least made on purpose. Fly Geyser was not. Located in the Black Rock Desert of northern Nevada, about 20 miles north of the tiny town of Gerlach, Fly Geyser is a trio of multicolored cone-shaped mounds that shoot scalding water into the air continuously. The whole structure looks like something a concept artist designed for a science fiction film and then forgot to tone down. The colors, blazing reds, deep greens, chalky whites, coat every surface and shift depending on the light and the season. Here is the part that makes it even stranger. The geyser was created by accident. In 1916, people living on the ranch drilled a well looking for irrigation water. They hit geothermal water sitting at around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Too hot to be useful, it was left alone, and over decades, calcium carbonate deposits began building up around the opening. Then, in 1964, a geothermal energy company drilled a second test well nearby. The water wasn't hot enough for their purposes either, so the well was supposedly sealed. The seal didn't hold. Hot water began pushing up through the cracks, and the second, larger geyser, the one everyone photographs today, slowly grew from that improperly capped well. The vivid colors aren't paint or minerals in the traditional sense. They come from thermophilic algae, microscopic organisms that thrive in hot, wet environments. The algae colonized the mounds and turned them into something that looks genuinely alien. Scientists who have studied the geyser have noted that the internal structure also contains quartz, which is forming at a rate far faster than is typical for geysers. Something researchers describe as highly unusual. The mounds now stand roughly 6 feet tall and continue growing several inches each year. The entire formation sits on a 74-acre spread of pools created by the constantly flowing water. In 2016, the Burning Man project purchased Fly Ranch, all 3,800 acres, for $6.5 million. Guided nature walks are available, though access is limited. If you're driving State Route 34 and catch a glimpse of something glowing and steaming in the desert, that's it. You haven't lost your mind. Not yet, anyway. Place 17, Antelope Canyon, Arizona. Antelope Canyon doesn't look like a place on Earth. It looks like the inside of a painting that somehow got three-dimensional. Located on Navajo Nation land near Page, Arizona, this slot canyon was carved over thousands of years by flash floods pushing through the narrow sandstone passages and wearing the walls into smooth, flowing curves. The result is a corridor of rock that spirals and bends in ways that seem physically impossible. Soft orange and red walls that ripple like fabric frozen mid-movement, lit by shafts of sunlight that drop down from narrow openings far above. There are two sections. Upper Antelope Canyon, known to the Navajo as the place where water runs through rocks, and Lower Antelope Canyon, which requires descending via ladders into a narrower passage. Both are on Navajo Nation land and accessible only through guided tours run by authorized Navajo-owned companies. The canyon is one of the most photographed places in the American Southwest, and possibly the most photographed slot canyon in the world. What the photos rarely convey is the scale of what you're standing inside. The walls rise up to 120 feet in some sections, and the passageway at its narrowest is barely wide enough for two people to pass side by side. When the light beams fall through the cracks overhead around midday, the canyon floor lights up in shades of amber and copper that have no real equivalent in any other natural setting. A Navajo guide once described the canyon as a place where light becomes something you can almost hold in your hands. That's not an exaggeration. Place 16, Grand Prismatic Spring, Wyoming. From ground level, Grand Prismatic Spring looks impressive. From above, it looks like someone dropped a giant eye into the middle of Wyoming. Located in Yellowstone National Park, it is the largest hot spring in the United States and the third largest in the world, measuring roughly 370 feet across and more than 121 feet deep. The water at the center is a deep, clear blue, so hot that almost nothing can live in it, and shifts outward through turquoise, green, yellow, and vivid orange and red as the temperature decreases toward the edges. Those colors are produced by different communities of heat-loving bacteria called thermophiles, each thriving at a different temperature zone. The blue center is too hot for bacteria and gets its color from the way water absorbs light. Moving outward, each ring represents a different microorganism, each producing a different pigment. The result, viewed from above, is a set of concentric rings so geometrically even and so vivid they look digitally rendered even when you're standing directly in front of them. The spring discharges roughly 560 gallons of water per minute at around 160 degrees Fahrenheit. The steam, particularly in cooler months, creates a perpetual haze across the surrounding landscape. The best view requires a moderate hike up the nearby Fairy Falls Trail. From the boardwalk at ground level, the colors and heat are impressive. From above, you finally grasp the scale of the whole thing. Place 15, the Wave, Arizona/Utah border. Getting to the Wave is half the battle, and the battle involves a federal lottery. This sandstone formation sits in the Coyote Buttes north area of the Paria Canyon Vermilion Cliffs Wilderness, straddling the Arizona-Utah state line. It is one of the most visually extraordinary rock formations on Earth, a valley of smooth, undulating stone where the layers of Navajo sandstone have been sculpted by wind and water into flowing, wave-like curves over millions of years. The striped bands of red, pink, orange, and white run through the stone in continuous, unbroken arcs, giving the entire surface the appearance of a frozen ocean swell. Only 64 people are permitted to enter per day, awarded through a Bureau of Land Management lottery, a process that typically means applying months in advance and still not getting selected. The round-trip hike is approximately 6 miles through unmarked terrain. Visitors navigate by landmarks, since trail markers would damage the landscape. The colors and forms shift through the day as the sun moves overhead. Early morning light turns the stone a muted rose. Midday sun intensifies the reds into something almost fluorescent. Late afternoon casts long shadows across the curves that make the three-dimensional structure of the rock suddenly obvious in a way it isn't in most photographs. People who make it through the lottery and complete the hike tend not to have much to say about it afterward. Not because it disappoints, but because it doesn't. Place 14, Bonneville Salt Flats, Utah. The Bonneville Salt Flats are 30,000 acres of nothing. And somehow that nothingness is one of the most visually striking things in the country. Located in the northwestern corner of Utah, near the Nevada border, the flats are a remnant of Lake Bonneville, an ancient prehistoric lake that covered much of what is now the Great Basin. As the lake evaporated over thousands of years, it left behind a vast crust of salt that is in some places 6 feet deep. The surface is almost perfectly flat and almost perfectly white, stretching in every direction until it simply disappears at the horizon. During the wet season, a thin layer of water turns the entire expanse into a mirror. The sky and the ground become interchangeable. The clouds below your feet look exactly like the clouds above your head. You have no visual reference for where the earth ends and the sky begins. The flats are famous as a land speed record location. The surface is so flat and firm that it has been used for high-speed vehicle runs since the early 20th century. Speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour have been recorded here. There is something surreal about standing on an ancient lake bed in the Utah desert that also happens to be one of the fastest places on Earth. Place 13, Mendenhall Ice Caves, Alaska. The Mendenhall Glacier, outside Juneau, Alaska has been retreating for decades. What it leaves behind, for now, are caves that glow blue from the inside. The glacier is roughly 12 miles long and sits about 12 miles from downtown Juneau. As the ice melts and the glacier shifts, meltwater carves tunnels and chambers through the base of the ice. The interior of these chambers is lit by natural light filtered through walls of compressed glacial ice that is tens of thousands of years old. That ice contains very few air bubbles, which means it absorbs almost all wavelengths of light except blue, and the result is an interior that glows in a deep, ethereal blue that looks less like ice and more like something from a dream. The caves are accessible only by kayaking across Mendenhall Lake and then ice climbing over the glacier itself. A significant physical commitment that means relatively few visitors ever see them. The experience is also time-limited in a more serious sense. The glacier has retreated nearly 2 miles since 1958, and climate scientists studying the Mendenhall have noted that the caves exist only as long as the glacier does. The caves that exist today are not the same caves that existed 5 years ago. The ice is always moving, always melting, always reshaping itself. Some passages accessible a decade ago are gone. Others have opened in their place. The whole thing is in a state of perpetual, slow disappearance. Place 12. Trona, Pinnacles, California. Driving through the Mojave Desert at night and encountering the Trona Pinnacles without warning is not an experience that leaves you calm. These are 500 tufa spires rising from the floor of the Searles Lake Basin in the Mojave Desert of California, near the town of Trona. They range from a few feet to nearly 140 feet tall, covering roughly 5 square miles. The spires formed underwater between 10,000 and 100,000 years ago when Searles Lake was full of water. Tufa forms when calcium-rich and carbonate-rich water interact. The resulting calcium carbonate builds up around underwater springs, slowly constructing towers from the lake floor upward. The lake dried up, and the spires were left standing on the exposed desert floor, casting long shadows in every direction. The whole landscape feels like the aftermath of something. Because the formations are so well preserved and so otherworldly in appearance, they have been used as filming locations for dozens of science fiction movies and television productions, including scenes from Planet of the Apes, Battlestar Galactica, and various Star Trek productions. Filmmakers come here when they need a landscape that says, "Not Earth," which is somewhat ironic, given that it is very much Earth, just an extremely strange part of it. Place 11. Crater Lake, Oregon. Crater Lake is the kind of blue that makes you think the photo has been edited. It hasn't. Located in southern Oregon, the lake sits in the caldera of Mount Mazama, a volcano that erupted catastrophically approximately 7,700 years ago. The eruption was so large that the mountain's peak collapsed inward, forming a bowl roughly 6 miles wide and nearly 2,000 feet deep. Over centuries, the caldera filled entirely with rainwater and snow melt. No rivers flow into it. No rivers flow out of it. Because there are no inlet streams, almost no sediment enters the water. The clarity is extraordinary. Visibility can reach over 100 feet. Light penetrates deep, and the way pure water scatters sunlight at this depth produces a shade of blue with no real equivalent in nature. At its deepest, Crater Lake reaches 1,949 feet, the deepest lake in the United States. Rising from the water near the western shore is Wizard Island, a cinder cone that formed after the original collapse and now juts nearly 800 feet above the lake's surface. Boat tours cross to the island during summer. The effect of crossing that flat blue expanse toward a small green volcano is something photographs consistently fail to fully convey. Place 10. Painted Hills, Oregon. The Painted Hills in central Oregon look like someone ran a spectrum of earth tones through a striping machine and then forgot to tell the landscape. These are low, rounded hills near the town of Mitchell, Oregon, part of the John Day Fossil Beds National Monument. The colors, deep reds, golds, blacks, greens, and pale yellows, come from different layers of ancient soil and volcanic ash that were deposited over millions of years during different climatic periods. The red layers were formed in warm, wet climates. The black layers are from ancient swampy conditions. The gold and yellow layers represent periods of more arid, oxidizing conditions, because the colors correspond to different geological eras layered directly on top of each other. The hills essentially function as a visible timeline of the Earth's climate going back 33 million years. What makes them visually remarkable is that the layers are not just stacked horizontally. They follow the contours of the hills, wrapping around the curved surfaces in continuous bands that shift and vary as the terrain changes. The colors are also sensitive to moisture. After rain, the reds deepen and the yellows brighten. On dry days, the palette is more muted. The hills look different every visit depending on season, light, and weather. No two photographs of the same spot are quite identical. Place 9, Havasu Falls, Arizona. Havasu Falls is the kind of place that exists in the back of your mind as a concept. Turquoise water, red canyon walls, the middle of nowhere. And then you see it, and it turns out reality actually delivered. Located in the Havasupai tribal lands, deep within the Grand Canyon, the falls drop roughly 100 feet into a wide, travertine pool of water that is an almost impossible shade of aqua blue-green. The color comes from high concentrations of calcium carbonate in the water, which reflects light in the turquoise and blue spectrum. The surrounding canyon walls are a deep burnt orange and rust red. The contrast is so vivid it looks saturated beyond what nature should be capable of producing. Reaching the falls requires a 10-mile hike into the canyon, a permit obtained through the Havasupai tribe, and reservations that sell out months in advance. There are no roads to the falls, no parking lots, no visitor centers at the bottom, just the trail, the canyon, and eventually, the water. The travertine deposits are constantly being added to by the mineral-rich water, which means the shape of the pools and the edges of the falls change over time. A series of floods in 2008 and again in 2010 significantly altered the formation of the pools directly below the falls. What visitors see today is not quite the same shape as what was there 20 years ago, and it won't be the same 20 years from now. Place 8, Devil's Tower, Wyoming. Devil's Tower is a place that generates questions before it generates answers. The most immediate one, standing at the base and looking up, is, how does something like this exist? Rising 867 feet from its base to its summit and 1,267 feet above the Belle Fourche River. Devil's Tower is a monolithic igneous rock formation that stands entirely alone on an otherwise flat and open plain. The sides of the tower are covered in vertical columns of phonolite porphyry, a type of igneous rock formed when magma cooled and contracted, creating geometric polygonal columns that run from the base to the summit in nearly perfect parallel lines. The columns are so regular and so geometric that they have, at various points in history, inspired theories ranging from ancient volcanic activity to entirely non-geological explanations. The geological consensus is that the tower formed when magma intruded into surrounding sedimentary rock and cooled underground. The softer sedimentary rock eroded away over millions of years, leaving the harder igneous core standing in isolation. The columns at the base can be up to 20 feet wide. Devil's Tower became the first designated national monument in the United States in 1906 under President Theodore Roosevelt. It is also a sacred site for numerous Native American tribes, including the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Kiowa, each of whom have their own traditional stories about how the tower came to be. For the Lakota, the tower is known as Bear Lodge, a name that predates the current designation by an unknown amount of time. Place 7. Bryce Canyon, Utah. Bryce Canyon is not technically a canyon. It's an amphitheater of erosion, a series of natural bowls carved into the edge of the Paunsaugunt Plateau filled with thousands of rust-red and orange spires called hoodoos that look like they were printed from a file nobody approved. The hoodoos form when water seeps into cracks in the rock, freezes, expands, and gradually breaks the stone apart, a process repeated over 200 times a year at Bryce's elevation. The result is a landscape of impossibly thin towers, windows, and fins of Clarin limestone that glow almost radioactively at sunrise and sunset. From the rim, looking down into the amphitheater, the formations cover the floor so densely they look like a crowd. Snow makes it stranger. In winter, the orange and red rock disappears under white, and the hoodoos emerge from the snow like something that shouldn't be standing. Rangers call it one of the best times to visit. Most people don't come in winter, which is their loss. Place 6. Hamilton Pool Preserve, Texas. Hamilton Pool Preserve sits just outside Austin, Texas, and it looks like it belongs somewhere in New Zealand. This is a natural swimming hole formed when the dome of an underground river collapsed thousands of years ago, creating a grotto roughly 50 feet deep. The pool is fed by a waterfall that pours over a limestone ledge and drops into the basin below, surrounded on 3 sides by a curved, overhanging cliff draped in hanging stalactites and mossy vegetation. The water is a clear jade green. The overall effect, the curved cliff, the waterfall, the green water, the hanging rock formations above, produces a space that looks thoroughly constructed, as if a production designer spent months getting the proportions exactly right. The site is managed by Travis County and requires advance reservations. Swimming access is sometimes restricted based on water quality. During low rainfall, the waterfall slows to a trickle. After heavy rain, the pool fills and the waterfall surges, and the space takes on a different character entirely. Place 5. White Sands National Park, New Mexico. White Sands National Park in New Mexico is 275 square miles of gypsum sand dunes so bright they require sunglasses in full daylight. The dunes in the Tularosa Basin are not typical desert sand. Gypsum, a soft mineral used in drywall and plaster, is water-soluble and rarely survives long enough on the surface to accumulate. At White Sands, gypsum crystals dissolved from the surrounding mountains wash into the basin, where they have no outlet and cannot drain away. The water evaporates, the gypsum remains, and over thousands of years, wind has sculpted it into dunes that are startling white. Not off-white, not cream, but the kind of white that bounces sunlight back in a way that makes the entire landscape glow. The dunes can reach 60 feet in height and shift by as much as 30 feet per year as the wind redistributes the sand. Plants that grow here have adapted by growing rapidly enough to stay above the sand as it builds around their stems. The park sits partially within the White Sands Missile Range, which means road closures occur periodically for military testing. There is something almost poetic about some of the most visually serene landscape in the country sitting next to one of the country's most active weapons test sites. Place 4. Monument Valley, Arizona/Utah border. Monument Valley has been photographed so many times that it has started to feel like a backdrop. Something placed there for the specific purpose of making things look cinematic. It was, in fact, placed there by 50 million years of geological time. Located on the Navajo Nation at the Arizona-Utah border, Monument Valley is a collection of red sandstone buttes and mesas rising from a flat, rust-colored plain. The most famous formations, the West Mitten, East Mitten, and Merrick Butte, stand between 400 and 1,000 feet tall. The surrounding softer material eroded away over millions of years, leaving the harder sandstone pillars standing in isolation against a sky that in this part of the country is often an extraordinarily deep blue. The valley is managed by the Navajo Nation as Navajo Tribal Park and has its own entry fees independent of the Federal National Park Service. The 17-mile Valley Drive is accessible to most vehicles and passes through the formations at close range. Guided horseback and jeep tours are available through Navajo-owned operations. John Ford filmed 7 westerns in Monument Valley between 1939 and 1964, and the landscape became so tied to the cinematic American West that many people assume the scenery was constructed. It wasn't. Ford just showed up and pointed a camera at it. Place 3. Thor's Well, Oregon. Thor's Well is a saltwater drain on the Oregon coast that appears, at the right moment, to be actively swallowing the Pacific Ocean. Located at Cape Perpetua on the central Oregon coast, Thor's Well is a naturally occurring hole in the basalt rock along the shoreline, roughly 20 feet wide. It connects to the ocean below through underwater channels, and as waves roll in, water surges up through the hole, explodes into the air in a column of white foam, and then drains rapidly back down. During large swells and at high tide, the effect creates the illusion that the ocean is being pulled straight into the earth. No one knows exactly how deep the hole goes. It is accessible via a short path from the Cape Perpetua scenic area, but standing near it is genuinely hazardous. Rogue waves regularly sweep the surrounding rock platform, and visitors who get too close have been swept off the ledge. Warning signs cover the area. People take photographs from inches away regardless. The best photographs are taken during incoming high tide around sunset, when the light turns the surging water gold. At low tide, it's just a hole in the rocks. Place 2. The Badlands, South Dakota. The Badlands of South Dakota look like a landscape that a computer generated when asked to make a planet that humans haven't been to yet. The Badlands National Park covers roughly 244,000 acres of eroded buttes, pinnacles, and spires in the southwestern corner of South Dakota. The formations are built from layers of sedimentary rock, shales, siltstones, sandstones, deposited over the past 75 million years. Erosion by wind and water has carved this material into an intricate, jagged landscape of sharply pointed ridges and deep, narrow gullies, spread across a vast, otherwise flat prairie. The colors in the Badlands shift dramatically with the time of day and the weather. At sunrise and sunset, the pale yellows, pinks, lavenders, and deep reds of the rock layers are lit from an angle that creates shadows so sharp the formations look almost drawn. In overcast conditions, the same landscape takes on a flat, gray tonality that is somehow even more forbidding. In the middle of the day, the eroded surfaces shimmer with heat. The park also contains one of the world's richest fossil beds. Fossils of ancient horses, rhinoceros relatives, saber-toothed cats, and dozens of other species from the Oligocene epoch, roughly 23 to 34 million years ago, have been excavated here. The landscape you're walking through is also an archive of a world that no longer exists. Place 1. Lake McDonald, Montana. Lake McDonald, in Glacier National Park in northwestern Montana, has a shoreline covered in rocks that look like someone went through them individually with a paintbrush. The rocks are the main attraction here, though the lake itself, 10 miles long, 472 feet deep, set against a backdrop of peaks rising over 8,000 feet, is far from unremarkable. The stones along the shoreline are smooth, flat, and come in a remarkable range of colors: deep reds, bright greens, blues, purples, oranges, and yellows. The colors result from the specific mineral content of the ancient Precambrian rock, some of the oldest surface rock in North America, combined with the algae and the way the clear, shallow lake water refracts light onto the stones below. The water in Lake McDonald is so clear and so clean that the colors of the rocks below the surface are visible from above, and the shallow areas near the shore take on a turquoise-green tint that looks more appropriate to the Caribbean than to northwestern Montana. Like much of Glacier National Park, Lake McDonald is a place under slow transformation. The park currently has roughly 26 named active glaciers remaining, down from an estimated 150 during the late Little Ice Age in the mid-1800s. Visiting now means seeing something that future visitors will not see in the same form. None of these places required a graphics card. No render time was involved, no AI was prompted. Every single one of these landscapes is the result of geology, time, water, wind, or in one case, an improperly capped oil well in the Nevada desert. The United States is, against all reasonable expectation, genuinely full of places that look like they were designed, and you don't need to go anywhere else to find them. If this video gave you somewhere new to add to your list, hit like and subscribe so you never miss out on more videos like this one.